مساء الخير للجميع. أهلا وسهلا فيكم في جلسة جديدة من جلسات QRTA Talk. اليوم جلستنا مثيرة ومهمة كالعادة. رح نحكي عن علم التعلم، وبالأخص الموائمة بين كيف نحن بندرس وكيف طلابنا بيتعلموا. ضيفنا لليوم السيد خفير أرغويلو، وهو المؤسس والمدير العام لمؤسسة كوجكس. قبل ما نحكي عن كوجكس بحب أعرف بضيفنا، وهو بيحمل شهادة الماجستير أو شهادتين ماجستير بكل الأحوال من جامعة ييل وجامعة هارفارد، وهو باحث في جامعة MIT. نرجع نحكي عن كوجكس، وهي مؤسسة تعنى بتطبيق علم التعلم أو تطبيق علم المعرفة بشكل عام، وهي ترجمة لعلم التعلم اللي هي Science of Learning لبرامج قائمة على الأدلة اللي هي Evidence-Based Programs. Good afternoon, good evening, Mr. Khafir, and we're going to start with you right now.
Wonderful, thank you. One day I will understand you in Arabic, but that day is not today.
We should work on your Arabic a little bit, yes.
Assalamu alaikum, I can say, to start. So we're here today saying that we will be talking about the science of learning, specifically to align how we teach in order to teach in a way that fosters learning, right? So teaching so that students learn. So at CogX, we are a research and development firm in applied cognitive science. What that means is what we do is translate research on human learning in order to develop evidence-based and application-ready programs in order to improve teaching and learning, right? So we work closely with researchers and academics to close this gap so that teaching is more synonymous with learning. And we partner with academics, leading scientists around the world, and organizations that want to adopt this. We have successfully translated about 1,200 scientific papers for global studies and worked closely with more than 16 experts in order to create a world-class program for parents, for students, for educators and school leaders from different universities across mostly the United States, but also other parts as well, and this keeps changing. So the goal for us is to make this readily available everywhere on earth. We work in Arabic, we work in Spanish, we work in English, and we're adding other languages as we move along with adoptions in other countries. Our primary goal is to see results happen in each of your countries while adjusting to the actual culture. That's very important. So the rest of today, I will actually focus on some learning principles that relate to the questions that I asked you. And they should follow a sequence that makes logical sense. The first would be that before we teach, we should quiz. This is very unusual and very uncommon, but just like I did now, I started with a poll to better understand your perceptions. If you're an educator, it's better for your students' learning if you quiz them before you teach them, and you quiz them about that which you have not yet taught them. That is called priming. This is not to give them a bad grade. This is not to give them a bad experience. This is actually done so that the brain is better prepared to learn, because it is sending a signal to the brain about what they will be learning, and the brain is therefore ready to process the information more actively. So priming is very positive for learning. The second learning principle is that before we put evidence-based instruction in the minds of our students and our educators, we have to make sure we get rid of myths. So some of the learning myths that we covered, left brain, right brain, visual, auditory, these things are not true. It's important that we realize that they're not true so that we can displace them with evidence. That's very important. Why is this the case? Well, if you look at textbooks that prepare educators to teach, they barely cover the science of learning. They barely cover evidence-based instruction. Only one page in 1 out of 6 books talks a little bit about evidence-based. I would argue that there's nothing more important to teach than understanding how humans learn. Clearly, you know chemistry if you're my chemistry teacher. That makes you a chemistry expert. That does not make you an expert at teaching. The only thing that makes you an expert at teaching is understanding how your students learn. That is a scientific process that would be a beautiful marriage between the expert in chemistry, in math, in anything, with your students' needs for learning. So what we find through research is that the traditional way of teaching is usually disconnected from how students learn. And that causes for too many students to lose interest, lose motivation, and lose engagement, because if they're being lectured to, or if the way they're being taught is not leading them to be interested or to succeed, it's natural for students to lose an interest and become disengaged in their own learning process. And what science says is, in order for learning to unfold, two things have to happen. One is teachers must master the science of how students learn. This allows you to design your teaching and your lesson plans in a way that promotes learning. If you incorporate, say, spacing, interleaving, appropriate use of self-testing, opportunities for students to elaborate or generate explanations for active learning, that makes you a more powerful teacher because it promotes greater learning. And the other side of the equation is effective learners also need to learn to learn. So a student has the responsibility to learn, and they cannot be held accountable unless we teach them how to learn. You don't take a child and throw them into a swimming pool and say, swim. You teach them how to swim. But in school, we throw them in the classroom and we say, learn. And we don't teach them how to learn. So all research says that to be an effective teacher, you must master the science of learning. To be an effective student, you must master the science of learning. This makes it so that everyone is more content with their job, because that way your expertise in chemistry can be understood by the student. The other learning principle we'll cover here is learning is a science. It must be taught. So we are all curious human beings. We're born with a desire to learn. Our brains are naturally curious, but we are not prepackaged with the optimal, effective way to learn. That is not how we are created. Unfortunately not. We need to learn that, just like we need to learn to walk and to swim, and every activity that is complex, and learning is one of them. So we must explicitly teach our students how to learn. And that's proven through scientific research. The other thing is, when we don't teach students to learn, they tend to use the worst strategies possible. So they can be more effective, more efficient, which means they can do better and spend less effort if we teach them how to learn properly. Here's a cover of a book that I don't expect you to know what book it is, but does anyone know what book this is? I'll give you a hint. It is a Russian author, a famous Russian author. Does anyone know who I'm talking about? So this book is by Leo Tolstoy, and there's also a movie, if this helps. Why am I putting this? What is this in relation to learning? The first page, the first sentence of this book says something very powerful. It says that happy families are all alike, but every unhappy family is unique in its own way. What does this have to do with learning? So what does this have to do with learning? All successful learners have something in common, right? Successful learners are all alike, but struggling learners are unique, because the reason for my struggle could be very different than the reason for your struggle. I could have a problem with my processing speed that is completely invisible to you, but causes me to struggle when I learn. You could have an issue with your working memory that has nothing to do with my issue, but it also forces you to struggle. Both of our issues are invisible to our teachers and maybe even to our parents. So how does the teacher know how to help me learn if they cannot see that the root cause of my problem is a processing speed that's invisible to them? How do we make that visible? How do we differentiate teaching so that I can process the information and that you can also process information? Every single classroom is diverse, meaning not skin color, not socioeconomic. I'm talking about cognitively diverse. There are children that have very fast processing speed, and that has nothing to do with intelligence, and children that are bright and have very slow processing speed, and they will learn differently, not because they're auditory, not because they're visual, not because they're kinesthetic, because their processing speed is different. The same is true for memory, for visual processing, for working memory, for attention. So you have kids with different levels of skills that will inevitably affect how they learn. So we covered a little bit of this, which is academic performance is not learning success. I will share some free resources that you can then have access to at the end of this webinar, so you can learn a little bit more about academic performance and how it is different from learning success. But there's great evidence that when we create an educational system that focuses on academic performance, it creates enormous problems for our graduates. There are two types of problems. First, we have students that are not as interested in the school system because it doesn't promote learning. And second, those that actually do perform are sometimes not ready for the demands of a modern workforce. So by as early as 2025, and this study was done before the explosion of artificial intelligence, but in just 1 year, a little more than 1 year, half of the world's labor force will have to reskill or upskill. That tells us one really harsh truth, that no matter how well you do in school, you will have to continue to learn for the rest of your life. So if school doesn't teach you to learn, it will prepare you to fail, because for your entire life, regardless of what you do, you will have to keep on learning. So I think it's in the best interest of our school systems to promote lifelong learning, because the economy requires it. All of the jobs that are low on the skill set, that don't require too much complexity, will disappear to artificial intelligence. And even if they don't disappear, it is inescapable to be able to process information and make good decisions. Everybody benefits when that happens. So I think schooling would improve if we taught students how to learn effectively. When we focus on academic performance, we see that learning fades fast. We lose what we learn. This is the forgetting curve. This is a study from 1885. So this is about 138 years old. Very true today. So if we study the way we traditionally study, which is without understanding the science of learning, and we measure academic performance, we're taking students down the wrong path. They will forget everything they learn, and they will not be able to apply it. This is proven time and time again. When we test our students, even if they got 100, and we test them again a few months later, they fail. So it's not really very productive to study in a way that leads to forgetting, or to measure in a way that leads to forgetting. Why do we do this? The reason why we do this is because it is easy to measure performance. It is hard to measure learning. And when we created the educational system, we modeled it after the factory that had just been invented to create cars, which is an assembly line. The same person that invented the classroom had just invented the factory to create cars, and treated people as if they were widgets, robots that were thoughtless. And that was a terrible way to do it, and the way we have still do it in the majority of the world. So that type of approach fosters conditions of teaching that measure performance, but they do not lead to learning. If you do want to lead to learning, you actually make it harder for yourself and for your students, because learning is not chocolate. It's not a factory of dopamine that is just leading to pleasure. Learning actually has to lead to a struggle. What is, some academics call it productive struggle, others call it desirable difficulties, others call it the zone of proximal development, others call it the Yerkes-Dodson curve. All of these say the same thing. You need to have a certain level of effort so that when you extend yourself and succeed, then you have an appropriate release of dopamine because you achieved something. If it's too easy, I'm bored. If it's too hard, I'm lost. So you have to challenge students at an appropriate level in order to lead to their learning. When we don't, we have the problem of creating graduates that are not prepared to succeed in the workforce, as we saw in the previous slide. So here, this is hard to do for every single country, but for those that we have data for, we can say that we are measuring performance, which is not evidence of learning success. It is very concerning that our students' emotional well-being is pointing in the wrong direction. We have increasing anxiety, depression, suicide. This does not hold true for every country. This varies country by country. But we see in lots of countries that students are increasingly more anxious and more depressed. Social media and technology has played a very huge impact and role in causing this. So teaching students how to effectively use technology, especially social media, so that it doesn't trap them based on the science of addiction, which keeps them comparing themselves to others, that's not conducive to good well-being. But we have that which might feel like it's outside our locus of control, but is very important. It's affecting our students. Those two forces are not helping us in doing what we want to do, to promote learning success as parents for our children, as educators for our students, or as learners ourselves. So what we need to do is figure out how to promote well-being, how to replace performance with learning, and how to promote learning, which is what this is about. So if we look at other learning principles, effective personalization requires that we understand cognition. And I think this gets to the question that was asked before. What do we mean by cognition and learning? So let me explain it from a framework that explains cognition and learning from a hierarchical standpoint. This depicts or simplifies the role of cognition in learning. The first thing that happens when we process information is 3 cognitive skills must work together to make sense of what we're learning. These 3 cognitive skills are attention, working memory, and processing speed. If you are not paying attention, I'm wasting my time, because there's no way that the rest of your cognitive skills can show up to this party. There's nobody paying attention. So even if you're the smartest person on earth, have incredibly high logic and reasoning, incredibly high memory, without attention, there's nothing happening here. Attention needs to be on, sustained, in order to allow for information into your brain. So these 3 skills are really important. After that, then we go into managing information. We've made it into the brain. What does that mean? Managing is synonymous with executive function, and these skills allow us to start to make sense of the information and to take over with behaviors that promote learning. Then we get into applying. Applying for us means 2 things. The ability to encode information into our brain so that it can be stored reliably for future use. So encoding is part 1. There are 8 proven techniques to encode information effectively, which we cover in our programs. And then there are 4 strategies to retrieve information that are as important, but less known, and even more important because of that. You cannot apply that which you cannot retrieve. And if you trust that storing is enough, you tend to forget it, because memory solidifies itself through retrieval practice. So retrieval is how memory consolidates and becomes knowledge. Once you have knowledge in a way that's reliable and durable, then you want to monitor this process, which is metacognition. Metacognition is extremely powerful for improving learning. You can activate a student's metacognition. You never want to do this by itself, because if you don't give me skills to improve my learning, then you will give me the ability to monitor my failures. And that's not good. You need to give me techniques, you need to give me strategies, so that when I monitor myself, I know what skills I need to use in order to learn effectively. This webinar does not allow us to get into the how do I improve processing, how do I improve management, how do I improve applying, how do I raise metacognition. That we actually cover in the professional development programs, which is the how you improve these things. Right now, the purpose is to raise awareness about their importance, their role, and the relationship between these cognitive skills. The other learning principle I wanted to share is...
Do you mind if I just ask a question? Because we have some questions in the question and answer and the chat. I know you just said that the how part will be in other modules that are not going to be, we don't have enough time to discuss right now. but I have a couple of attendees who are asking, do you have, can you provide them with specific strategies to build an effective self-directed learning?
Yes and no, in the sense that self-directed learning is a whole ecosystem of things that need to happen. You can call self-directed, self-regulated. We call it a sophisticated learner is somebody that can do 4 things. They have skills and techniques in order to encode and retrieve information effectively based on the science of learning. They have a proper understanding of how they learn. They understand the whole process. 3, they can monitor and control. They have active metacognition. And 4, they understand the biases inherent to learning so that they can correct those as well. So what goes into self-directed learning is the whole thing. It's how do I sustain my attention? What strategies do I use as an educator to captivate attention? That's module 1. Module 2, how do I assume differences in processing? So if you give a solution, I think you fall into the trap of violating the science, because there is nothing that you should do as a solution without understanding the theory behind it. Otherwise, it really falls into the same problem of wanting a solution without understanding why. So the why and the how are really important, I think, as prerequisites to changing what you do. We will provide some information, but it's not as simple as do this and everything is fixed. You know, so I want to honor the complexity of learning and the process by which we get there. And I will point them to resources at the end of the webinar where they can take more information.
Would this also apply to another question that talks about metacognition and how can we promote metacognition with our students?
Yes, and I said if you go straight to metacognition, so there's nothing that gives a higher effect size in promoting learning success than metacognition. It's proven out of more than 300 things measured, the highest ranking was metacognition. So this is very important. What is dangerous is to chase number 1 and not understand how it's related to everything else. So if you raise my ability to monitor my learning and you do not give me skills to improve my learning, that's not good for me. Because now I have a telescope, I understand my problem, but you never gave me tools to improve. So metacognition does not work by itself. Metacognition works in the context of the whole way in which we learn. Do I know how to process information better? Can I manage it better? Can I encode it better? Can I retrieve it better? Do I understand executive function better? Do I know what behaviors lead to self-regulation and better time management? If I don't have all of those skills, please do not improve my metacognition, because you're going to depress me. You're going to give me a reason to understand my failure. Don't do that for me. Give me the skills to learn better, so then you can raise my metacognition. This is very, very important. And I can elaborate on this. Allow me to get to the end and we can come back to it as well.
I'm sorry. One more question, because it's related to what you just explained. There's a contribution that says mastering the science of learning depends on how enthusiastic the teacher is. Do you agree with this? Yeah.
You cannot force this upon a teacher. If the teacher doesn't care, we will not succeed. This is not a miracle. It's not religious. And this is not medical. It's not surgery. If you don't want it, you should not do it. A teacher must think that this is important for them to chase it, to master it, and to apply it. Otherwise, there is no success. It's guaranteed. It's guaranteed to fail. The teacher must think this is important for it to ever work. It's not that the science doesn't work. It's that we must care to make it work. And what we say in module 0, in the very beginning of the program for educators, is what is the teacher's role in this process? And that's exactly what that question is. Not only must the teacher care and want to master, if you don't have the right foundation, you cannot change how you teach. The teacher has to think like a scientist. What does the teaching like a scientist means? You start with a hypothesis. What do you want to measure? Then you apply, then you evaluate, then you iterate until you perfect. So there is no recipe. This is actually a theoretical understanding with application guidance, which CogX gives you, how to raise metacognition, how to ensure encoding, how to ensure retrieval. We give you that, but not in a recipe. We give you in a way that you can contextualize it, because you're teaching 15-year-olds history, because you're teaching 10-year-olds math. And the way those two teachers will do it is going to be different because they have different audiences. So if you give one recipe for both teachers, they'll both fail. But if you give them the right tools, they will both succeed. So this is really important because it's not a one size fits all. You can't just grab the candy and run. You have to invest, understand it, and then apply it, measure it, and modify it. So that's very, very important. And it is related to this principle of learning is emotional. If the teacher doesn't care, we fail. If the student doesn't care about what you're teaching them, we fail. How do you get people to care? And what learning is emotional means is two things. If I don't care, I'm not motivated. If I'm not motivated, I'm not prepared to learn. If I'm not prepared to learn, I won't learn even if I'm a genius. But on the other hand, there is the real effect of trauma. 1 out of 2 children on earth will suffer some sort of trauma every year. That is horrible. It's a very sad statistic. If you look about even geopolitically, moving around, having to be a migrant, this happens with many children that have had to relocate to Jordan, that have lost everything coming from Syria over the years. These are traumatic events that create an enormous impact in our cognition. And if we don't equip teachers with tools to address the emotional well-being of their students, we will be trying to teach to a brain that is not disconnected from their emotions. So both things work very closely together. And there's a lot of science on the emotional part on how to foster well-being as well. So what I was saying with the previous one, that learning can be emotional. If I'm suffering from anxiety, the cortisol that's being depleted in my brain will have a negative effect on attention, even on processing speed. It will make me process information slower. And as a result, I will inevitably learn less. So if we want to pick up the first domino, it's not learning, it's not the bad grade, it's the actual emotion that makes me get that bad grade, right? And this first domino doesn't have to be emotion, it could be cognition. And if we look at it from another angle, learning is also a cognitive process. And cognition can be the first domino that falls, and it can hurt my emotions, and that makes perfect sense as well. If you think about my processing speed is too slow. There are 2 parts to processing speed, inputs and outputs. And say you're teaching me and you're not aware of the fact that I have very slow processing speed. I'm not able to process at the speed at which you're teaching me. I'm aware of this. I'm struggling. I'm developing anxiety. I am not doing well. I'm losing my confidence. I'm misbehaving. I no longer want to learn. This is too painful. So it could be one skill, in this case, processing speed, that drops other dominoes and causes a series of negative emotions and negative behaviors, all of which contribute to my learning and my experience learning. So if we look at the 7th here, or 8th, sorry, all of this is important because neuroplasticity is your friend. Does anyone know what neuroplasticity means? In the chat, we might see. So this, what you might remember here in very simple terms is that our brain is the result, or our mind is the result of every single experience we live, right? So every time we feel, every time we challenge, every time we learn, we're actually firing neurons, and neurons that fire together wire together. And these form neural networks of skills that are being developed, of knowledge that is being formed. And that's the evidence that we have, that the brain is constantly changing in reaction to every experience we have. I like a quote that says, the mind is the personalization of the brain. We all have the same organ, but we each have a unique mind, which is shaped by, genetics and experiences. Go ahead.
There are so many people that are replying to your query about if you know what neuroplasticity is. And there are some interesting replies. Like, for example, one said that it's how easy new neurons are created. Another reply says, your neurons are elastic and are able to make connections faster. There's another one in Arabic, is the ability of the brain to control your outer behavior.
Oh, great.
And there's another one in Arabic. I'm trying to translate them quickly.
Thank you.
It's the ability to control your tempers and behaviors. I like this one, honestly, that your brain is adaptable.
Yes.
And mainly it's all about adaptation, honestly speaking.
Yes, neuroplasticity is how your brain is constantly changing in response to every single experience that you have. Good, bad, desirable, undesirable, everything is changing constantly because your brain is not static, it's dynamic. So all of the neurons firing as a result of everything you hear and experience has an everlasting effect. So even the struggle in the classroom, if I go to school and I don't do well, how do you think I feel? How do you think my self-image evolves? How do you think my confidence, my desire to learn? So much happens as a result of the experiences that we live in school that shape who we become forever. And neuroplasticity is why it is your friend. And your students should know that they are more in charge than they know of positive emotions, of positive experiences, and of actual lifting their ability to learn. And that's really important because then you take it from being a passenger of bad things to being a driver of good things. And that's very important for students to know. So here are some quotes from research of what neuroplasticity is. It's the brain's ability to structurally change in response to learning. We know that the brain changes constantly in response to our environment. This is Deutsch's book of 2006, How the Brain Changes Itself. This is a scientist that used to not believe in neuroplasticity, and then he became a strong advocate through his own research of how important this was. We used to think that intelligence was fixed. If it's not fixed at birth, it becomes fixed shortly after birth. That is completely wrong. Intelligence is absolutely malleable in the sense that you can improve upon your ability to learn information. And that we know firsthand. We've done this for many, many years. And if you improve a student's ability to learn, you're directly improving their intelligence. And that's important. What is this? Since you guys are very active in the chat, what would you guys say is this? If I just lost my voice and you had to explain this, how would you explain this? What am I sharing here? I can't read the Arabic, but Amjad, can you?
Yeah, I'm waiting for their prize actually.
Okay. There's no right answer, and this is a bit tricky.
There's one in Arabic that says it's the ability to absorb the process of learning and adaptation.
Okay, this graph. All right. So
another one, it's a level of learning. There is someone that says it's the ability of learning along with age.
Okay, you see it go up, 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 and then down, down, down. Hopefully not.
IQ level.
Okay.
And it's about how much we can adapt to difficult new things. It's another one about adaptation with variables. It's a natural curve of students' performance in class.
Okay.
It's the iceberg of learning. Then we have the working memory without retrieval and scaffolding will cause the learning process to decline. Learning and teaching efforts, the bell shape of our expectations about our learners. Excellent.
Okay, let me toss one more in there. This is a normal distribution curve, which in statistics is supposedly to represent the population. Says some people are right in the middle and the majority are in the middle. And then you have just as many to one side as you have to the other. Our educational system is pretty much designed around 3 colors, 3 flavors, 3 speeds. And the sad thing is they all depend on speed. So it means if you're orange, you're mainstream. We will teach you in the traditional classroom, whatever that means. The speed of your content will lead you to graduate and hopefully be ready for college. If you're on the gifted track, we'll give you more content. Again, we're making it dependent on speed and we just give you more. So think about food. There's a buffet, there's an average size of a stomach. We give you an average size of food. If somehow you can eat more, we give you a bigger plate of food. And if you have a smaller stomach, we'll give you less food. That's our educational system. If you're gifted, we'll give you more food, more knowledge, more learning, more content. It's speed, speed, speed. If you have some sort of learning struggle or difficulty, we will reduce how much food, content, knowledge we give you. Again, it's a function of speed. All of this is wrong for many reasons. Because first of all, speed is the wrong variable. What you should care about is mastery. I have mastered chemistry. Let's go. Move on. Next topic. I'm not ready to move on. Please give me more time. Why do we all get 4 months for chemistry? That makes no sense whatsoever. So we move kids along across predetermined buckets of speed and content. And then we just simply change how much we put in the bucket if we think they need to go slower. Slow and fast would only make sense if processing speed was the only thing that drives learning, and that's not true. But the more important reason here is that the white dots could represent one person, not one dot per person. All of those dots that you see there are 10 dots. They could be the same person. How can the 10 dots be the same person? Which one am I? Am I gifted? Am I mainstream? Am I struggling to learn? Am I all of the above? I could be all of the above. Yeah. It could be that my attention is great. It is on the right, here on the yellow side. It could be that my processing speed is very slow. It's on the left in the processing speed. It could be that my logic and reasoning is okay, is in this middle section in the orange. It could be that my auditory processing is fine as well. It's in the orange section. So which one am I? Am I mainstream? Am I gifted? Or are you going to teach me a lot, a little bit, or in the middle? And most students have what we call a jagged profile. They have strong cognitive skills. They have some weaker cognitive skills. That's what makes them complex. But it gets even harder than that. That's a picture. I'm not a picture. I'm a movie. If my brain is changing as a result of every single experience, I am dynamic. I am not a picture. I'm a movie. What does that mean? Well, that means that my dots are going to be dancing throughout my life. So they're going to be moving. Now, how are you going to teach me? Did you notice that my dots moved? Whoops, I just had an accident. My attention is now very low. My parents are struggling. I'm going through some sort of trauma in my house. Did you know that? That's affecting my learning. If you don't, how do you teach me? So this is where it gets really complicated because humans are not one dot, they're many dots, and those dots are always dancing. They're dynamic. So we have to know what dots mean, what they do, and how do we target dots if we teach, if we're parents, if we're learners, if we're students. This should not be a black box. This should not be a mystery. This has to be really well understood because these are the parts to the engine of learning. And we cannot teach if we cannot see the parts. We cannot learn if we don't understand the parts. We have to be mechanics of our brain as teachers and as learners. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to ask now that to comment actually on what you've said. So can we say that a teacher should have good relationships with their students and they must be kind of empathetic in order to know how their students are going to learn, so they don't actually frame them in one specific direction?
100%. Many things. I will ask some more questions in a second survey that is going to be open in a few seconds. And in that survey, I will answer that question. And please call me if I don't do that. But we will do that in a second. So we will try to cover 12 principles. I'm at number 9. And then I'm going to open the second poll. And after the second poll, I will give you a gift of more information that you can walk away with.
Great.
So number 9 is prior knowledge predicts learning. Do you agree or disagree? In the chat, in any language you want, between Arabic and English.
Yep.
So what are we saying?
They're agreeing with this quote, actually.
Why? I suddenly don't agree. Can you convince me?
Oh, we have 2 disagreements.
Okay, disagree. Okay, explain why. Let me make it dramatic. Last year, I was the worst student in the school. I did really poorly. I failed just about every class. This year, I am committed to being the best student. I have learned how to learn. I have overcome my emotional struggles. I'm motivated. I'm here. My cognition is ready. What might go wrong?
Someone's telling you that they disagree because you can always learn new stuff.
I can. So it's tricky. And everybody here is right, because our brain is plastic. It can keep learning. But sometimes knowledge builds upon itself. Can I do calculus without adding numbers? Can I do algebra without understanding division? Can I do physics without having studied any science? So why is some learning more cumulative than others? Well, I can tell you, I was a struggling learner for a period of time in my life, and that prevented me from certain careers because I simply lack the foundational understanding in order to move on. I missed that train. I cannot get on it unless maybe I go back to being 13 and fixing that, and then I acquire the necessary academic content knowledge that I need in order for it to build upon itself. I was still able to learn new things and get 2 master's degrees, and I think I'm a lifelong learner. But there are some things that I just missed, and I never got. So both things are true. If you want knowledge to build upon itself, we have to teach for learning and not for academic performance. And what ends up happening is that the jobs that the modern economy depends on, STEM jobs, so science, technology, education, math, unfortunately, these build upon themselves. So prior success predicts future success. And therefore, we want our students to be ready to succeed in the next class, because all of that will make them succeed in life. And that's really important. So instead of advancing them to the next grade when they're not ready, we have to make sure they're actually ready. Otherwise, we're setting them up to fail, or we're limiting dramatically the opportunities that they'll have in their life, right? And that's not what an education is about. So I'm glad you guys, here's like, of the 4 global studies that were done, all 4 said prior knowledge predicts future knowledge. And before I share this quote, what I'll say here is, if I know a lot, I can learn faster, because knowledge is associative, meaning for me to learn something new, what my brain is doing is it's trying to connect the new to the old, what I already know. So my brain is quickly trying to build a bridge between what I know and what I'm trying to learn. That's the job of working memory. If working memory doesn't find anything in my brain that relates to what you're saying, then what you're saying is too hard, it's too foreign, it's too disconnected. I cannot follow you, I cannot make sense, and I cannot bring it into my world. So the more I know, the more dots of knowledge I possess, the quicker I can catch whatever you're teaching me. And so the more I know, the more I learn. The less I know, the less I learn. So knowledge is your friend. For future knowledge, you depend on prior knowledge. And that's what I mean here. The brain is plastic, but you have to give it something to catch the new stuff, right? And that's all of this, all of the research says exactly that. You want prior knowledge. So we're almost done with this part. We're at number 10. Memory is your friend. Not rote learning, not surface learning, not learning to forget. Memory to create knowledge, and knowledge is a prerequisite to critical thinking and creativity. It frustrates me when I see books that say, let's do critical thinking and creativity. Of course, let's do that. But let's not forget that to do that, we have to pass the bridge of learning. You don't just jump to the island. You don't. You have to build a bridge, and you have to ensure that learning unfolds. So education tends to chase the next gold shiny object, and we tend to forget, like, there is an engine, which is your brain, and there are parts, which is cognition, emotion, and behavior. And cognition has many parts: working memory, long-term memory, attention, processing speed, visual, auditory, all of these things, executive function, are the parts of your engine. That's the bridge. If we don't pay attention to the bridge, we'll never get to the island. And I think we have for decades wanted to go to islands without building bridges. And cognition is the bridge to whatever destination you want to get to. Number 11 would be memory depends on other cognitive skills we sabotage. So as you see, I keep connecting in this web emotions, cognitions, behavior, interdependencies. What could I possibly mean here? Memory depends on other cognitive skills that we often sabotage. Let's go back to attention. I said at the beginning of this webinar, if I'm sharing information with you and you're not paying attention, we're wasting our time, because you could be a genius. You could have every other cognitive skill could be beautiful and perfect. But if attention is off, it's like the keys to the car are not here. We cannot turn on that engine, right? So can anyone tell me in the chat, what are the types of attention? Don't Google, just tell me what are the different types of attention that exist.
Actually, Hafez, there's a nice comment about the Down syndrome child. They say that their deficiency is because of the lack of memory, or something that has to do with weak memory.
Working memory is what it says, right?
Working memory, yeah.
So yeah, so yes, and the Down syndrome is an extra chromosome, but what it also does is it's a cutoff on your IQ. If it's below a certain level, then it's deemed as you know, the impairment is defined that way. So it's not just working memory that's low, but it's other cognitive skills that are low as well. But in this case, does anyone know short-term and long-term are memory? And there is short-term memory and there's long-term memory. There's emotional attention. Here's the question. So let me ask you differently. Is there one person in the room that teaches students and does not depend on attention for them to learn? Right? So it's a kind of a silly question. You can't teach without attention. Yet, none of us ever no one ever educated us on how do I sustain my students' attention? How do I captivate attention? Do I even understand the different types of attention and how they're affected in life? So how can we depend on something that we're never trained to understand or to sustain? That makes no sense, right? So this is really important. And attention, there are 4 types. And the very simple way to look at this is 2 are your friends and 2 are not your friends. Do you want to feed your friends or do you want to feed your enemies? This is an overly simplified description, but the 2 that are not your friend are the ones that we feed every day and we strengthen the enemy. Divided attention and alternating attention. How many of you know a teenager that says, leave me alone, I'm studying? No, you're not studying. Yes, I am. Let's see what you're doing. I'm texting, I'm listening to music, and I'm studying for tomorrow's exam. How? Well, you're constantly shifting your attention between activities. You're waiting for the next text because it gives you a little bit of a dopamine release, which gives you pleasure. And that's a little bit of a seductive distraction, which you chase with your attention. I'll come back to my homework. I'll come back to studying. I'll change the song. I love that line from that song. That's great. What was I studying? Let me read it again. All of this is feeding the monster of divided attention, alternating attention. So as humans, we use technology and technology ends up using us because it captivates our attention by constantly distracting us, which is the opposite of learning, right? If I'm learning, what are the 2 types of attention that I actually need? This is what we depend on as learners and as teachers. Those would be our sustained attention and our selective attention, right? So if I select one thing to focus on and I don't allow any texting, I don't allow any music, I'm in the tunnel. I can expect to get to a zone of maximum productivity and deep focus, sometimes called flow, right? If I can focus for a long period of time, I'm in sustained attention. If I can block other things, I'm in selective attention. So as students, we need these 2 to learn. As teachers, we need to know how the 4 work, which ones hurt you, And if you make your students more aware of how their habits are hurting, and if you make teachers more aware of how to sustain and captivate attention, everybody benefits. None of us have gotten training on that, I guarantee it, or most of us, 99%. But we all depend on it, and that makes no sense whatsoever, right? So when we start the professional development, we start with what is your role, which was your first question, ironically, and then how do I get your attention? Because without that, I'm in trouble. And then we unpack everything else. So this is important to understand attention. So how do these interact? So if my attention goes down, everything else is in trouble. But let me explain the relationship. Our attention says, wait, we have somebody speaking. I'm going to try to pay attention and make sense. So I have activated, and I have a trick here. I'm using multimedia. It's all to get your attention so that your eyes have candy. It's my graph. Your ears have hopefully some candy, which is my voice, and that doesn't hurt, I hope. The combination of two is for dual coding. I'm trying to activate your auditory processing and your visual processing to captivate your attention. This only works if your working memory shows up to the party and says, wait, I have some information in my brain that can connect with what that man is saying, and it makes sense. Or I'm going to challenge him. I don't think what he's saying is true. But you can only do that if your working memory pulls from your knowledge and starts to play with the new information. And this little working group of two, attention and working memory, depend on a third player, your processing speed. And the three make sense of new information that's coming into your brain. Now we have an opportunity to learn, because if these three show up to the party and they do their job, then we can build knowledge, and then we can apply knowledge by retrieving it. And now we have gained something in our brain. But all of this has to happen. And if attention doesn't show up, we're in trouble, right?